Hi everyone, I am so excited about today's video because it involves me writing a critique of my friend Matt's one-act play entitled Billy, about Billy Vanderbilt. My name's Asa. I'm a horror writer living in Mexico City. I wrote 6 sermons, Audible's original starring Stephanie Shu. My goal with this video is to give you an overview of one writer's method of writing notes, writing critiques, in the hope that it'll provide you with some ideas for your own critiques. And at the very least, if you're new to writing critiques, a foundation, a potential template to experiment with. The first thing I want to talk about is why knowing how to write a good critique is so important to being a professional writer. So having a stable of readers, of trusted parties, of allies, creative allies who can engage with your work meaningfully is really a hallmark of any kind of professional writer, and being able to do that for others is also a true skill, a necessary contribution. A couple things to think about before you say yes. So, the first thing I would say is just to fully acknowledge the significance of this ask. It's a really big deal if someone comes to you with their work and trusts you with it and asks for your feedback about it. So, ask yourself, actually, can I give this ask the sort of attention it deserves? This is something really important to this person who came to me. Can I deliver and give enough of myself to honor this request? The other thing I was saying before yes is to check in with them about kind of deadline, timeline, when do you need notes back. Make sure that you can give them the kind of notes that they need before the deadline that they have. You said yes, all right, and now you've got the script or the document or the manuscript, and before you start reading, there's a couple things that you need to do. You need to go back to the writer and try to get some context about the project. Questions I like to ask include, what is the status of the project? Is this a first draft? Is this a polished draft? What is your dream outcome for this piece? Is this a passion project that you're just kind of looking to improve on your own terms and might self-publish one day? Are you trying to sell this? And if so, what does that look like? Is this sort of more of a commercial piece? Is this more of a literary piece? Is this a magazine piece? Are you trying to get this story to the New Yorker? What is the kind of ultimate goal of the piece? Identifying that and identifying the status is going to give you a better sense of where the project is now, which will help you give the best notes possible. And then finally, of course, always explicitly ask whoever it is that gave you this piece to read what it is that they're looking for. I always print whatever it is that I'm reading. I like having a hard copy. I think with a hard copy and the ability to physically write notes, I can kind of more actively engage with the piece. My brain is working with it in more ways. Of course, sometimes you have to read things on your computer or, on a Kindle. And in that case, I really recommend having, a legal pad or a notebook, something to actually physically write notes. I think kind of adding that kind of dimensionality and that physicality to the way that you're engaging in the piece ends up generating better ideas that you can then go on to deliver to the writer. So the first time that I read it, I call the first read kind of a heart read, right? I come into it not so much as a writer, but more of a media consumer, a reader, a person. And I just want to engage with the piece from an experiential point of view. I want to kind of let it wash over me. I want to kind of feel this piece of art. I want to cry. I want to, any kind of emotion that this piece is trying to work on me, I want to make myself available to it. And so, as much as possible, I try to turn off any kind of analytical or critical mind when I'm reading through a piece for the first time. I think that's really important to kind of, in order to honor the piece, you need to kind of give it its chance to really bring whatever it is that it wants to bring. A big rule of thumb for me when thinking about writing critiques of other people's work or engaging with other people's work in a potentially critical way is to try to meet the piece on its terms, right? So if it doesn't want to be a thriller, don't try to make it a thriller. Don't interpret it with a thriller. If this isn't a traditional save the cat 3-act structure, don't force it into that. Try to identify what it is doing as a piece of art, and then kind of once you've identified to the best of your ability as a consumer its idiom, you try to kind of enter that idiom, talk to the piece, and therefore talk to the writer in the sort of aesthetic terms of this particular project. For example, Billy. It's Really, it's a piece of theater, so from the jump, we're kind of dealing with a different sort of imagination than we might from, say, a screenplay or a novel. And it's also kind of farce, right? So the characters are acting in a certain way that's kind of within the range of plausible human behavior, but it's still sort of very heightened. The language is really heightened. There's real poeticism to a lot of the dialogue. So I'm really kind of trying to note these things as I'm reading. And I'm thinking to myself, for example, okay, if I'm talking about this particular character being sort of not having clear enough goals or, kind of traditional analysis of character, how does that change given that this is farce? Given the tone and genre of this piece, right? That's kind of what I mean by trying to meet it on its terms, is identifying picking up what it's putting down. The second read is when the pen really comes out, when the writer hat goes on, where I start thinking about all those kind of crafty type things, character structure, arcs. One thing that I think is really important is to always look at kind of basic clarity issues. I think particularly on early versions of something, a lot of times you've got to think about potential, or a favor that you can do for writers is to kind of see if maybe there's some blind spots, right? See if there's some things that kind of they've lost the thread about in their own writing that, hey, listen, actually, it's not clear. You never told us in the first act that this guy had a sister. And so when you talk about the sister in the second act, it doesn't make any sense. These are kind of basic clarity items that all come up all the time that I think I certainly really appreciate as a writer when I get sort of, oh, hey, by the way, this isn't as clear as I think you think it is. Other things to look at, of course, are fundamentals, theme, structure, character, tone, go through these. And the more you do this, you're kind of organically building all this into your notes, building all this into your critique. But if you're just starting out, it might be a good idea to kind of go through each of those categories, kind of identifying all the different facets of the diamond, looking at the story through each of these potential lenses to see if that generates any kind of ideas or places where the piece really resonates, or if you really rub up against stuff. So, at the critical phase, you kind of want to attack the piece in front of you from as many angles as you can to kind of really illuminate as much about the piece as you can, so that when you go to write the notes, you can really be three-dimensional in terms of the feedback that you provide. And so this is where our sort of lives as writers become really personal and private and demand a lot of responsibility, because as we all know, sharing work is a super vulnerable thing. If anything is any good, we put ourselves into it. And so when we give that into someone else's hands to say, hey, what do you think of this? Can you critique this? There's an immense kind of personal ethical transaction at work. And so when you start writing a critique, first and foremost, you need to approach it with an attitude of kindness, an attitude of respect, treating whatever's been shared with you with the sort of sanctity that it deserves. And this is where kind of I mentioned it early in the video, where you have to, you ask the writer what they want, and then you have to sort of think about what they need. And that's when the context of this ask came to you. Is this a student of yours? Is this someone this is the very first thing they've ever written ever? Right? They don't even necessarily identify as a writer and they want to share it. These people don't even know necessarily what to ask for when looking for it. So you really need to think about where the person is at who has come to you, what they think of you. Like, is there a power dynamic? And really like look at all that once you go to sit down, because that should all really inform what you write to them in giving your feedback. I think a great way to think about writing a critique, a great goal to have, is that by the time the writer finished reading your critique, they feel inspired, they feel empowered and excited to get back to the work. What you definitely don't want is to someone feel discouraged, inadequate as a writer, or feel that the problems that the piece has are insurmountable. Any of these things have grave consequences, and if you give those to someone who's early in their career perhaps, or particularly sensitive, or sharing something particularly sensitive, that can have really disastrous consequences. Instead, you want to energize someone to return to the manuscript renewed, confident, brave, willing to just dive back in with all of their creative being to kind of make this thing better than it was before. How do you do that? So, what I always love to do when I'm reading the script that second time is put a little check mark on all the places that kind of really my attention really leapt, that really kind of energized me as a reader and that really resonated. And I call these just the gems. So on any kind of critique document that I write after I've given kind of a more holistic overview or sort of some bigger issue thoughts. I love to make a little list of all the little things that I've really loved. Whether it's a word choice or a joke or something that made me laugh out loud, I always let them know. Just to, because often there's a piece that there's always grace notes, hopefully, there's always things to be excited about, and people love hearing about that. And so I always like to make a list of kind of little things that really activated me while I was reading. Another thing that you can do that can achieve this effect of leaving a writer energized, I really like using language of opportunity when identifying problems. So, for example, if there's a valuable interaction, if these two characters, a brother and a sister who haven't seen each other in 20 years, meet, but the execution of that reunion is muddy or cliche. One way you can talk about that is, you can sort of articulate those problems, but what you can also say and should say is, hey, this is a really important scene. This is great. These two characters find each other after 20 years. I really think this is an opportunity to kind of, really bring us to a new emotional place as we enter the third act. And I really think this scene, you should attend to the scene because I really think it can elevate the climax, right? So it's just kind of bringing an attitude of kind of a growth mindset, staying positive, thinking in terms of possibilities, of opportunities. Using that kind of language when writing about someone's work is the kind of thing that can bring them back to the manuscript renewed, which, as I said, I think at least is a principal goal when writing a critique. One little kind of coda to all this is, on the one hand, of course, we've talked a lot about being kind, respectful, all that good stuff. I do think it's important to be kind of direct if you are making a critical remark. Um, in the age of exclamation points everywhere and kind of uh, ultra concern, I do think there is value in kind of being explicit. If you are going to make a critique, say it clearly so that the writer can understand exactly what you mean. The best readers are ones who get you excited to return to your work, but also are candid about the places that they identify as problem. You can trust them. It's a question of credibility. And if you're only talking about the good stuff and you thought the piece was a disorganized mess and you don't say anything about problems and structure, it undermines your credibility as a reader and is a disservice to the writer. And, eventually they'll stop coming to you for reads because they'll realize that your critiques are sort of coming from a good place, but actually insufficient. These are my various thoughts of the way I give notes. I'm really curious to hear other people's sort of strategies and thoughts. This exercise for me really succeeds. Like, wow, there's so much to this. There's so many layers of giving notes. And so I'd really love to hear how some of the other writers out there do this. Anyway, I'm a new author tuber. Subscribe, like this video so more people can see it. And I'll see you in the next video.